to grind. It's when an individual pushes his or herself to work hard and hustle to attain a goal, dream, or outcome. And on this show, we feature people from all industries about what they do, how they do it, and the grind behind their success. This is GrindMode. Hello, everybody. You know who it is. This is Mr. Patrick Kofi Austin, and we are here for another episode of Grind Mode. And on today's episode of Grind Mode, I have a really good friend of mine, Mr. Derrick Winston, executive leader in the corporate world, really pushing the envelope on, helping, companies grow with his leadership skills and his management skills, especially in the pharmaceutical world. And he's going to be here today to talk to us a little bit about some leadership things. How it's going to, how it's changed now in this new environment we're working in due to COVID and doing things virtually. And then, of course, just some general things that, that we all like to question and know. So we're about to bring Mr. Derrick Winston to the stage, and he is here. How you doing there, Mr. Derrick Winston, sir?
I'm good, bro. When we're going to eat again?
we're gonna eat again. So I gotta come your way to eat this time since you came over this way to eat last time.
I'm thinking something a little bigger than that.
That too, but but I like where you're going with it. See, this is why I like doing this show, because he understands the entrepreneurial spirit. He understands the business. And this is how we do when we talk about eating. There's two different ways. There's real foodie eating. And then there's business talk about eating, where we're trying to all get to a place where we're all trying to be and help each other out. And that's really why I like doing this, because I get to talk to people that are on that same level.
That's right.
And inspirations to other people. So with that being said, Derrick Winston, tell us a little bit about you, what you've done, what you do, what you plan on doing.
Oh, that's good, man. So I'll try to keep it pretty short. I'm a second line executive leader for a small biotech company that specializes in rare liver disease. And that rare liver disease primarily team of. You lost me?
Yeah, we lost you just for a little bit there.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that. But yeah, so we specialize in rare liver disease, primarily in women. I lead a team of other leaders who lead a team of sales professionals who go out and speak to hepatologists and gastroenterologists around this rare liver disease. There's not a bunch of patients who we're able to uncover that'll benefit from it. But for the most part, I lead a team of leaders who lead a team of sales professionals, and I've been doing it now for 19 years across 3 different organizations. And then prior to that, as you know, I was a football coach for 5 years. So this is my second act in terms of my leadership experience. So that's what I'm doing now.
That's exactly what's up. And then being in the field of, leadership, I've been starting, as we've talked, and you've sent me some books and things to read, and as I'm starting to, look into more in that side for my personal, just personal life and personal living, and trying to, get ready for my next stage of life. Hopefully, there's it's hard being a leader, and especially just in general and dealing with people. Like, how do you get your mind wrapped around how you're going to approach, telling somebody good news, bad news, really trying to get the communication across to show leadership outside of, just telling people, because there's a lot of bad leaders out there that are they really don't lead, even though they think they are.
Man, that's such a loaded question. And unfortunately, maybe it's fortunate for me, I learned the hard way, just like anybody else. But I think the unfortunate part is that the premise around leadership is, or what's implied about leadership, is that everyone has the ability to do it, right? And so we assume that the things that we do individually will apply to being able to do that or lead others to do it, right? And so as a result of that, we never developed the skill of understanding who we are if we are leaders, and then how to actually lead other people. And then what ends up happening is most of us get anointed just because we were great individual contributors without ever ascertaining our ability to lead others. So, I think for me, the most important part is understanding, like, there's three different components to leading in any industry. And one is leading yourself. And you have to know yourself, leading yourself before you can actually lead someone else, right? And then the second is leading others. And then the third is leading the business or whatever industry that you're in. And although those are three completely different entities, they're not mutually exclusive. So you have to understand yourself, you have to understand people, and you have to understand whatever business or industry that you're in, and the different leadership capabilities that are required in each in order to be able to thrive.
That's actually some really good advice. Because I think you're right. Because I think most people just don't really understand the self part. I think they get maybe their industry and somewhat their people, but sometimes people don't really look at themselves.
That's right.
At, like, what am I really good at? Am I really good at this? Am I, do I have it in me
That's right.
to I guess lead from either behind or front, either way you do it, how, do you have it in your own? And that's awesome. Cause that actually goes into our next question about, how you got here. I mean, cause I know the story. You grind, and you've been working so hard, and you've been through a lot of adversity, excuse me, to get where you're at. So give us a little bit of background about you and your grind on kind of how you got to where you are now.
I think part of my story starts with failing, just like anybody else. Thinking that you know it all, thinking that you have all the answers, until something actually happens to where your livelihood, the people that you care about, is at jeopardy for that reason, for those reasons. And I learned pretty quickly that that it was really important for me to read the manual, is what I like to call it, right? So, like, a lot of times you just think you grind, and all of that stuff is going to come to fruition, when in any organization, in any industry, in any company, they have values. They have things that they care about the most. And if you read that manual and the examples that they value and will actually reward, then all you have to do is implement that. Right. So you just read the in other words, we show up at work every day thinking that, there's something behind the curtain, when in actuality, there is some process, procedure, manual, values that says follow this and you will be rewarded. Right. So I think I learned early just to read the dang manual and then deliver it. So read the instructions, and then deliver on the instructions, and then communicate it using their jargon, right? Like, this is what your expectation was. This is how I met or exceeded it. Here are the examples. And then here's whatever jargon that you use that makes it make sense to them, right? And I was too busy bucking the system and saying, I'm going to do it like this. I'm going to do it like this. So it stalled my career until I actually read the manual, and then it just took off from there.
So pretty much taking the company's purpose, finding your leadership strategy, and working that into what it is.
That's all right. And never having to compromise who I am. Like, some people say, oh yeah, you had to sell out, or you had to be something that you weren't to get where you are. Like, no, this is not my company, right? I understand their purpose, and I'm going to live their purpose better than you, right? I'm going to try to get myself to a point to where I am indispensable, even though all of us are dispensable. I'm going to try to make it seem that if there were only one person that they can actually choose in terms of sustainability, it would be me. and I would use the things that they value and my examples to explain that. And at the end of the day, then they expect those individuals to be able to replicate that in a way that's more becoming of a leader so others can do it. So that's really how I was able to do it. But, you know, aside from reading the manual, you also have to take some risks. Kofi, like, it's like the whole notion of scarcity, like in the career of pharma, it's no different than anybody else. Like anybody could be a CEO. Not very many people are actually willing to do what it takes to get to it. Right. So compare that to becoming a doctor. Like scarcity creates value in terms of the profession of being a doctor. So what actually differentiates those who become doctors versus those who do not is organic chemistry, right? It's organic chemistry actually creates the scarcity. It's really difficult. So if you pass that, you get closer to becoming a doctor. So you're going to have to take some risks to do some things to overcome that scarcity. Otherwise, we'd all be doctors, right? If there was no organic chemistry, you and I would be a doctor right now. Because like,
it'd be so easy.
Yeah, it'd be so easy. So that's no different than being a leader, a senior leader in the organization, becoming a CEO. There are some things that create a level of scarcity that we're just going to have to be willing to work hard at and take some risk to doing so that we can be considered and ultimately hired to do those things.
See, that's a really good, that's an interesting take. I never really thought about that. Because you're right. I mean, there are certain bumps and bruises and things like that, or you know, maybe levels once you get to a certain level that you need to take to become that higher level thing. And in the entrepreneur space, because that's normally where I'm at, you know, like I see that there's people that are scared to just start businesses, knowing there's a possibility they're going to fail, to find out what they're going to learn from it.
That's right.
I'm a master at that, by the way, if anybody wants to know, because I've had like six or seven businesses fail, or I've worked with companies that have not, I mean, I shouldn't say they failed, but, you know, they hit their spurt, they hit their trend time, and it was done and it was over with, and, you know, you move on. But like, that's a really good point. Like, that's a really good point. I never really thought about it like that. That's really what it takes. And that really differentiating yourself, you know, we were talking about branding, or, you know, that's what we say, differentiate yourself. You know, how do you do it differently? It kind of sounds like that's the same way of, you know, with, you know, leadership in corporate America. Is that kind of what you're saying?
That's right. That's right. It's really important that you understand that. It really is. Yeah.
Nice. Now, with that being said, see, I know you're a football coach, so this is where I've always wondered is with you being an old football coach, you know how this goes, up, down, run, do this, you know how you guys get, What did you take from being a football coach to learning how to deal with people, with, like, you know, taking, even though it's
zero.
Well, why is that? Okay, then. World. Okay, well, I guess the question is how taking it from, you know, corporate world on how that structures, and now especially in the new days, and let's just be honest, I hate to say this, but the younger generation that are younger than us, they're a little bit softer than us.
That's right.
Like, how do you see that changing in the leadership scale, you know, especially in the sports and athletes, on how that's changing? Because I know you still have a lot of coaches. Like, what are they experiencing with the change on how they go by their leadership skills in the sports realms now?
I'll tell you a really quick story that told me right away that everything that I did as a coach didn't apply in the corporate world. And as a football coach, that is. Right. So I was placed in a controlled environment where I was placed in multiple leadership scenarios where I can fail, basically, without actually practicing on real people.
Right.
And one of those examples was coaching a problem representative, if you will. Okay. So it was a scenario that was intended to be a 45-minute interaction where I had to basically inspire this person who was a tenured but yet problem employee to do their job. Okay. And yet here I am, I'm very new. And the conversation went like this. in about 15 seconds, I quickly said, you're either going to do this or subject yourself to to disciplinary action up to and including termination. And the whole team said, time out, stop the whole scenario. You can't do that. So my point is I learned early on that the only leadership style that I knew was an authoritative one. So it didn't matter who I was approaching. At some point, I just incorporated the only thing I knew, which is to tell football players to go, run, do this, do that, right? It was more authoritative, and we would call them out of their name, and we would say all the kind of things, right?
All types of stuff.
That stuff doesn't work in the real world. However, you can, if you build capabilities in terms of leadership and direction, you can lead up to that, and you may not ever get that. So what I learned in a controlled environment, you start with being participative, right? Participative. You're there asking questions. You're there to listen. You're there to get them involved and engaged. You're not there to tell them what to do. And after you've given them an opportunity to be engaged, to come up with the plan, when they don't, now you let them know, hey, you had your chance. Now it's time to be directive. So you transition from being participative to directive and say, well, here's what you're going to do. Why? Because it's your job. And here's what the expectation is. And we're going to move forward. And then if they don't respond to the directive leadership, now you go to the authoritative part, right? Now, and that's the point of the organization that I was learning from. Is like, wait, you can't just jump to the authoritative part. You got to be participative. You got to let them be a part of the plan. And then if they're not willing, then be directive, then go to the authoritative part, right? And to me, that's where I learned there was zero what I learned in terms of what my natural style was as a football coach that made sense to do right out the gate. Now, eventually, some of those things you use, but you gotta, there's different leadership styles. And to my point around knowing yourself and then knowing others, like you and I are friends. There's no way that I'm going to get anything out of you, even as a friend, if I just jumped right to an authoritative style, let alone if we weren't.
Right.
Like, if we were,
good
like,
point.
Either way, it doesn't work. Like, either way.
Like, let's go eat. I'm like, yeah.
That's right.
Or, let's go find a way to make some money. Yeah.
That's right.
But you're right. Yeah. Good point.
So that's really where it all started for me in terms of coaching and then the different styles of leadership that is really important to getting things done through others. That's really what it's about.
Nice. Okay. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. See, this is what I'm talking about, y'all. Are you guys listening to this? Because I'm learning today. Say this is why I bring people on here so we all can learn something from everybody else's grind. Everybody else's good and their bad and their mistakes. Because I already learned like two things. Don't yell at anybody right off a jump.
That's right.
That's awesome. Well, with that being said, then let's ask you this, and I'm sure this is kind of a loaded question. What's the three most important things that you think a good leader needs to have? Or if you're going to be a good leader, what's three of the most important things that someone needs to know?
So I'm pretty consistent. And I'm process oriented, and maybe that's not necessarily the best thing to be as a leader in sales. Because salespeople don't do nuance. They don't do process. They just want to get things done. But in order for me to stay true to not only who I am, but what the organization may want and then the people who I lead, I have to have some sort of process. So I mentioned to you my overall process and thinking of leadership. It involves leading self, leading others, and leading the business, right? So if I incorporate that to your question around the three most important things, when it comes to leading self, the most important thing for me is emotional intelligence and building that emotional intelligence, right? So, for example, within emotional intelligence, there is self-awareness, right? So if you are self-aware, then you understand how what you do, what you say affects other people, right? So now that self-awareness becomes social awareness. I'm socially aware of how I affect others, right? Then it enables you to self-manage. So now I say, oh, I yelled at, to use the example of yelling and being authoritative. I yelled at Patrick, right? But now I see how it affected Patrick. So now I can self-manage and say, wait a minute, Derrick, maybe you shouldn't yell at him. Maybe you should just ask him his opinion first, right? So now I've self-managed it, and I've managed the relationship between you and I. That was the result of all of it. So for me, that's all about emotional intelligence and understanding yourself and how you affect others. That's number one. The second thing to me, which is related to leading others, is knowing your bias. So that's part of you, and then also how you're different from others. So the best example I can give you is, we are on a team of 10 people. You're one of those people, but you're not a sports person, right? But every meeting I started with, hey, did you guys hear about that Cubs game or that White Sox game, right? And I end it with the same type of talk around sports. Well, that's my bias. And because I have that bias, I risk losing that one person on my team that may not be in the same boat as me, right? That's putting it mildly. So understanding my own biases so I can be more inclusive on my team, so I can include everybody and prevent from excluding anyone. So bias and inclusion would be the second part, the most important thing. And then third is something around like leading a business or your industry. It's something when you're talking about leading people, especially other leaders, is around something I call DAC, D-A-C, not Dak Prescott, not D-A-K, but DAC, D-A-C, and it stands for direction, alignment, and commitment. Okay, so just think about it from a leadership standpoint. It's like the telephone game, right? My biggest team that I led was about 10 leaders plus about 150 representatives. Okay.
Ooh, that's a big team.
So remember this. If you don't remember anything, it's not so much what you say, it's the interpretation of the receiver.
Okay.
Right. So I could say the same thing to 10 of my leaders, and it sound differently to all 10 of them. And not only does it sound different to all 10 of them, but the way they articulate it or communicate it to their other 150 folks may land 150 different ways, right?
Yeah.
So what that ends up doing is that ends up inhibiting the clear direction and alignment, so you can execute, and then ultimately people's commitment. So I just realized that if I actually wanted to execute, I had to be really clear in my direction. So we are aligned, going in the same direction. And that even if people didn't agree with what you were doing, because they were aligned, they could understand their level of commitment that they should have in their current jobs. So the three things for me to answer your question, summarize, is really the emotional intelligence, your bias, and which causes you to include or exclude people, and then executing, understanding the difference between providing the right direction so people can be aligned, and then ultimately committed to doing their jobs.
Those are a good ones. And I never really thought about that middle one too, because I'm a pretty well-rounded person, but really ending the inclusion part or exclusion, because I've felt that. Now that you say it that way, I've worked at a lot of places where I felt excluded, or excluded, I should say, just due to just some really small things that maybe that person just didn't understand, that I just like,
That's right.
That doesn't. You already lost me,
That's right.
or something. I'm like, okay, you lost me. Now I'm not listening to anything else you have to say from now on.
That's right.
Something probably really small,
That's right, man. I went through. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's fine. Go ahead. I was like, that was actually that's something that I subconsciously really didn't think about until literally you just said it. But I was like, man, I can remember, like I was, working at an agency at one point in time, and there was times where I'd be like, yeah, you guys just lost me, because like, I know what you're talking about. Like, I know what you want to say or want to do, but right now you guys aren't making any sense. So now you've lost me, because.
That's right. That's right. Look, I'll give you a really interesting story about leadership. When I was first becoming a leader in pharma, one of the guys who was this supposed guru of leaders and managing people, they sent us to this training in Houston, at Baylor University, and there was 30 people or potential leaders in the room. And of course, like many instances, I was the only one of color in the room, right? So automatically, I was feeling a little bit apprehensive about, the training. So the guy stood up in front of the group and he says, "Hey, rule number one, the leadership is pay attention to the dynamics of the room. Otherwise, you're going to lose one of the people that you lead." Right. So one of the things that he did to try to, bring everybody together was an icebreaker. You've been in these meetings where they have icebreakers, and the icebreaker was name that tune. Right. So basically he was gonna play some music to bring people together, right, to guess what these tunes are. And the prize was $200 cash. Like, this was, I don't know, 18 years ago, right? So the prize was $200 cash. And I was like, man, I'm in this one. Like, I'm gonna play. The only clue that he gave was 70s music. So I'm like, okay, I was born in 72. I might be able to do this. So he plays one song. I didn't know it. Everybody around me, they were writing something down. Plays a second song. I didn't know it. And I'm like, oh man, what's going on here? Like, everybody's writing the third song. By the third song, I was like, I don't have a chance. I threw my pen up in the air and I literally walked out of the room. And I mean, you know
yeah,
me,
I can see it, right? I can see it. Right.
So I literally walked out of the room, and when the session was done and over with, the guy came out and he says, "Derrick, is something wrong? Like, why weren't you participating?" I was like, "Can I be candid with you?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, you said your number one rule. You said is pay attention to the dynamics of the room. Otherwise, you can lose people, and that was your fundamental rule for leadership." He goes, "Yes, and." I said, "Well, you lost me from the very beginning." He goes, "Well, why?" I said, "Because you said 70s music. You didn't say one particular genre. You chose 70s classic rock. So if you know me in the spirit of inclusion, like if you know me or anyone else for that matter, to choose one particular genre in a room of 30 people is pretty presumptive, don't you think? Like, you didn't pick 70s anything. You didn't pick 70s country. You didn't pick 70s R&B. You didn't pick 70s disco. Nothing. You just picked classic rock. So what makes you think that I had a chance at that? So you just broke your number one rule. I didn't have a chance at it. So I walked out."
Right.
And he was like, "Oh, I'm sorry." So like, that to me is where you start with leadership, and with being within, understand who you are. If you understand that, you understand your bias. If you understand your bias, you know how that would affect someone else. So now you know that your bias is classic rock. Then you have to pay attention to the fact that, well, maybe not everybody understands or knows classic rock. So let me throw in a song that's 70s country. Let me throw in a song that's 70s disco. Let me throw in different genres of music. That way the Derricks or the Patricks of the world don't walk out or don't say, "Hey, you lost me." Right. And that was a real big lesson for me. That's why I say bias and inclusion is really critical in terms of the things to being a good leadership.
Yeah, and especially now, we're in 2020, and obviously we are dealing with a lot of different issues. But the one thing that is definitely being addressed now that I'm so glad is inclusion. Not only minorities, women, the LGBT community, things like that. In the leadership setting, those have to be more important and have been thought about a lot more. How have you seen that change in the last, let's just even say, 5 years? It'd have to be drastic, right? Or to a
point it has been. I think the problem is you're still, inclusion is about the majority versus the minority. And if you are in the majority, you don't ever feel the need to include others, because you're already in a group of people that you have a ton in common with. It's always the person that's the minority that recognizes, hold on, I'm not being included here, right? It's always the minority that has to draw attention to it. So the way it's changed is that what's happened in the rest of the world has caused people to be a little bit more aware of that. But the problem is they don't know how to actually deal with it. They still don't know how to be inclusive, right? So they do nothing. Right? They just they sit all the, like, the guys who don't look like me, who are the same position as I am, they still struggle with it. Like they're afraid to have a conversation about what's happening out there, whether if it's George Floyd or what have you. I used the example the other day. I've got 4 middle-aged white men on my team. All right. And we had a community check-in call about everything that's happening out in the world. And I went to the community check-in call out of respect to my 4 middle-aged white guys. Why? Even though the call was about African Americans and about George Floyd and all that other stuff, they are still impacted by that.
Yeah.
Right. There are things. So me being self-aware and an understanding of inclusion made me show up to that, making sure that I heard more about how it makes them feel, regardless if they're Black or not, right? Like I need to know how it makes them feel. And right now there are middle-aged white men out there who feel like there's a target on their back. They feel like they're not worthy of their jobs anymore because of their white, right? Because they're white, right? They feel like they're gonna lose it and be the ability to take care of their families for that reason. Well, if I'm leading them, then it is my responsibility to know that, to feel that, to address those issues of the feelings that they're having, not just lead the team of people because of the flavor of the month is about Black folks, right? So I think the majority sometimes lose sight of that, so they don't feel like they need to be involved in it. Like it's, just the other day we had a national call and one of our senior leaders led everyone in prayer, right? Like literally, he's like, hey, during times of stress and strain and pain, I tend to turn to my religion. So if everybody would give me a moment, he started to pray, right? And there's 200 people on this call. Well, but he's a part of the majority. So he's always felt comfortable that was okay to do. Right. Until someone says, wait a minute, time out. So if I was Muslim and I wanted to be my authentic self and lead everybody in a prayer using, things from the Holy Quran, would that make sense? Or would I be excluding a bunch of people by doing that? Right. So the majority, it always excludes people. It's always the minority that looks and calls those things out, which is the reason why it's important to be a much more well-rounded leader, to know what your biases are so you can include more people.
Yeah, see, that's a really good example. Like I could see how that could definitely be an issue. I mean, or is it, it's, I would say, yeah, you pretty much probably not a good idea, but
I had a question with one of my peers the other day, and they was like, hey, I don't have a problem with anybody, with a leader, praying. He's like, I'm Christian, right? That's my deal. He goes, so I struggle with being my authentic self as a leader by not doing that. And the only example I used was like, hey, if you and I go break bread, if we go eat, and we're just friends, right? Are you going to ask me to pray with you? Or are you just going to pray, and then out of respect, I'm gonna let you do that, right? And then when you're done, go on doing what we're doing. I think it's just we've gotten to a world where a lot of these things have been called out, to your question, but people are still trying to figure out how to navigate and lead through it. And unfortunately, since they do nothing. They stay quiet. So that's the unfortunate part.
Yeah, I was gonna say that sounds like probably the worst part, at least because that's good that someone even spoke up to say something, because just so he knew, or so or people like know, because I think that's our biggest problem right now. I think, as like you said, in leadership, is the people not saying anything, because I think if people if you at least say what you mean, or and have a valid point for yourself of at least what at least when you're communicating, people know where you stand. And then you can adjust, and people can adjust and move from there. But there's so many people that are just silent, and that is the bad part. Like, at least let people know where you stand. If you're actually, say you're a leader and you want to be, unless you want to be a follower, because if you're not, I guess the people that are saying stuff are leaders. The ones that aren't really are just followers. I guess that'd be the simple way to put it.
That's right. Just have the conversation.
Yeah,
and just have the conversation. Struggle with that. that in leadership, that is so important to just have the conversation to understand other people's perspectives, because you would go, it not only will it enable vulnerability in individuals on your team, but it'll create a more innovative environment because people are more willing to jump in and bring their natural self. I always tell people, like, the fastest way to get into a swimming pool is to jump in. The second fastest way is to be pushed in. But you and I both know, as Black folks, we don't want to be pushed in nobody's pool. Right?
I don't think anybody really wants to be pushed into a pool.
That's right. That being said, though, if you know you're going to a pool party, you know D Win is going to push you in the pool, right?
Right.
You either are not going to go, right, or there's going to be a fight. I'm going, but we're going to fight if you try to push me in a pool. Or you would just rather jump in yourself. Don't push me. Let me jump in myself, right? So having the conversation, to my point, in an open environment where people can be vulnerable enables innovation by people jumping in on their own. Like, let me jump into this. I don't care if it's cold. Let me jump in, give you my thoughts, my insights, my ideas. And eventually you create an environment where now everybody, is understanding that they're valued, and regardless of what their views are. So that's where we got to get to.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. That's something that, like I said, I know, like I said, I'm new to really trying to really look into the leadership thing and learn more about it. But that is something even I could point out as a lowly, what do you want to call it, a newbie to figuring this out. Like, you just have to at least communicate, and as soon as we start communicating, that's where a lot of the stuff happens and it helps.
That's right.
And that's
right.
a good thing. But with that being said, in COVID right now, like I said, we in the intro, like, how is it communicating in this new virtual world with your staff? Like, what are some of the things that you're seeing that are really good, and what are some of the things that maybe you're seeing that are happening that kind of is hurting that communication and for your guys' company and business, and your leadership?
So the thing that's really good, and this may be the funniest thing ever to you specifically. the thing that's really good is people who get paid to understand technology but don't are actually understanding it now, right? So everybody's been pushed into the Zoom pool, pushed into the WebEx pool, right? Pushed into figuring out how to enable your camera on your computer, right? Like, how do I enable that or disable that? Like, stuff that you've known for decades, right? So now although we've been getting paid for it all this time, we haven't been held accountable to actually using it. So the good thing is that people are raising their knowledge for technology. The other part is a simple conversation like this could be considered on a telephone. Now you actually get to see somebody's face.
Right.
So things are less likely to be taken out of context.
Very much.
You actually can see their face. You can see my disposition, but although I may have said something that landed weird on you, you can see I'm smiling. So it was just a joke, right? So people are less likely to take things out of context because they can actually see your face, and they don't necessarily need to be next to you now. Like, you and I felt like now you and I have connected today, even though we've talked on the phone a couple of times. It feels like I've connected with you because I can see your face right now.
Right. Yeah, it's a whole different experience.
Entirely different experience. So it doesn't have to require you to actually be out there with somebody. The downside to it is that we are still communicating from afar, and which means that we're using our cell phones a lot. So there's a lot more text messaging and stuff like that. And that a lot of the times that stuff is taking place after hours. So we're losing the respect for people's personal time to some degree for that reason, because we're relying so much on our technology or different ways to get in touch with them. The other downside is that we're inundating. So now the whole world, especially in the sales world, has become this Salesforce this virtual sales force, right? So whereas before you've got the sales force that are out there beating the streets, knocking on doors, and then you have the people who are the marketers that are from behind and they're calling. Now everybody is calling, right? So, and the phones are blowing up and there's just not enough time, and there's more people than there is time, and it's causing people to just shut down, to my point earlier. Like, okay, then I just don't talk to anybody.
Talk to anybody right now.
Yeah. And then the other part is we picked up this need to actually communicate virtually without actually building the skill to do it.
Oh yeah.
So
training because people are just jumping in, going with the same kind of normal pitches, the same kind of things that they had in person over the phone or over video, over Zoom. It's not the same.
That's right. Right. So you get, you just jump on the phone and you just say, hey, Patrick, so tell me about this and tell me about that. And so the intent is all one-sided. It's, and it's like, well, when am I going to actually make him feel like he wants to give me this information, which is much easier to do in person than it is over the phone.
Yeah.
So being able to build those skills or capabilities to make someone feel valued enough to want to give you information over the phone when they've got 101 things going on over here, that's a skill that's learned, and we've got to find a way to pick that up before we just pick up the phone.
Do you think that now, with now everybody learning this, like the people are going to be using different methods moving forward, because people are still we're eventually going to get back to actually meeting people. You're eventually going to get back out to going in door to door, going in sales, meeting people, really doing that whole dinner and, schmoozing part of sales. How do you think that the integrating now with it will change? I mean, because you think everybody will go away from phone calls? You think video will be the way to go, or?
No, I think it's here to stay, actually.
Really?
Because it's an alternative to do everything that you could do live. Now, I think when if there ever is a time where we do go back to normal, we will certainly appreciate that more, in my opinion, right? Like, I can't wait for the moment where everybody say, all right, everybody back, it's green, and I get to go break bread with all my boys. Like, it's going to make me want to hug them, right? And I think with the people that we work with, the same way. Like, we normally have 4 meetings a year with our entire sales force. So the idea of never having that is something that we're longing for and we're missing. But when it comes to actually solving for things in terms of when somebody doesn't have any time, now our customers or our friends and peers are more likely to say, hey, let's put a Zoom or WebEx on the books. We would have never done that, right? We would have said, well, call me or something or of that nature. I think we see these video conferencing as something similar to actually, meeting the person live. So I think even though when things get back to normal, I think there'll still be some significant value in it, because it'll serve as another option that makes sense.
Nice. Yes, and I like to hear all that, people, because I've been talking about streaming videos and radio and streaming everything for about 10 years. So this is I love COVID. This has been fantastic for me, at least, because I still been able to communicate. I've still been working.
You got to figure out what's next, right?
Yeah. My problem is I need to stay here for a little bit, because that's my problem. I'm always going to something next once everybody catches up. I gotta stay here for at least 2 more years, I think.
I got you. I'm trying to retire early, so I'm trying to figure out. It's almost like the CD to the tape, the tape deck, right? And then the iPod to the CD, and streaming to the iPod, right? It's like, who would have thought that streaming would be a thing, and completely just do away with an iPod or anything. Like, you could just get it. You can stream on any device, right?
Everyone thought I was insane when I brought it up about 7 years ago. People were like, no, it'll never happen.
That's right. See, you gotta be the entrepreneur that you are and figure out what's next. Get out of that 2-year space that you're in right now. We need you. We need you.
Okay, we'll think about that. We'll think about that. Maybe that's what that extra eating thing we were talking about at the beginning of this episode. Maybe that would be what
That's right. That's right. That's right. That's right.
All right. Well, we're getting a little bit low on time. So I got 2 more questions I want to get to before we get out of here, though.
Yep.
What books on leadership do you suggest that people go read, like right now, especially if you're new to really trying to learn about it, or even if you're, in a leadership position, but you're just kind of looking at some different angles on ways to just maybe change some of your approach. What do you suggest?
So again, I said I'm consistent. So leading self, I see most of the books that we use as leaders is about leading others or leading the business. Like I see leadership more about a thing that's within. So most of my books are about that, right? So like the first book is something called, I brought a couple with me, but the one that I'm going to tell you about, I don't have it next to me, but it's called Leadership and Self-Deception. And it's by the Arbinger Group. And leadership and self-deception is truly about how we are unable to see that we are the problem. Right? Okay. So
Boy,
the example.
Note to self. I gotta read that one.
So we're self-deceiving, right? Ourselves. So an example of that is at the beginning of the book, they talk about a baby. Okay, a baby who can't crawl forward. Okay, so the baby is only learned to crawl backwards, and they have pushed themselves to a point that they were lodged in between 2 chairs. Right, and no matter how hard they pushed, they just kept making themselves more stuck. Right. And if the baby could talk, the baby would tell you that it's the chairs. Self-deception, right? It's the chairs are the problem. What the baby needs is for someone to let them know it's because they can't crawl forward. Like if you could crawl forward, the chairs wouldn't be an issue. So leadership and self-deception helps you understand what are the things that you do to self-deceive yourself, right? That causes you not to be aware of the problem that you're causing, right? So that's one of my favorite books. It's a great listen. Another book for me is called Multipliers by Liz Wiseman. Multipliers is really just calling out the difference between leaders who multiply others' behaviors versus those who diminish their behaviors, right? So there's a great 2-minute clip on YouTube about Liz and the definition of multipliers. That's really cool. And you could probably think of a leader who diminished your behavior, right? And the things that they've done to actually contribute to that versus the ones who multiplies your behaviors.
That's some of the
part in that.
Yeah, a couple of both.
Yep. So that's a really good book for me. And to me, I mentioned earlier around the manual, like I have a manual. A lot of people don't believe in this stuff, but this book right here cost me $220. Okay? Right. It's called For Your Improvement. So when all else fails, instead of reading a book that you have to interpret in terms of how you're going to use it, just get the manual. This book tells you exactly how to put in specific actions for people who aren't action oriented, for people who have issues with approachability, for people who have issues with career ambition. And there's a table of contents that enables you to go right to the areas that you need to go into, like strategic skills, understanding the business, getting organized. So all of these have specific examples of what's unskilled, what's skilled, and what's determined as an overused skill for each of these capabilities. And then they will tell you what are some causes of it. It'll give you a roadmap and then some remedies to it. So if you can imagine, as a leader, you're trying to figure out, okay, well then how do I
get to this person? How do I get them to communicate? How do I?
That's right. So if they're struggling, like for example, I'm leading leaders, and one of the topics is managerial courage, right? So maybe I have 2 or 3 leaders who are struggling with having managerial courage to hold people accountable. So I just go to managerial courage, and it'll show me for a person who has managerial courage, what's their skill, what's an overused skill, what is unused, right? And then what's the roadmap? What are the things that this person could do to actually live through it? So all of these other books that I read, you have to interpret how you're going to use it. Whereas this just tells you what to do, right? So,
right. Like this is, or at least gives you a start point for a solution or how
absolutely.
to do it. At least a start point.
Yeah. So For Your Improvement is the 3rd book. So Leadership and Self-Deception, Multipliers, and For Your Improvement are my 3 favorite books. But there's so many others, man, that you can use.
Nice. Well, I'm gonna go. Looks like I can audible 2 of them. The other one, I just gotta go ahead and pony up this 250.
Well, no, you wouldn't have to do that. I'll find a way to get you on. You know how we do.
Well, I appreciate that. That's what's up.
Yeah.
That's what's up.
Yeah.
Well, Mr. Derrick Winston, before we go, my last question for you is, man, what would you tell your 21-year-old self, knowing what you know now about life, business, leadership? Like, what would you tell yourself at 21?
So I've always been one to say what's on my mind.
Right. Always.
And I would still try to be who I am and authentic in doing that. But I would tell my 21-year-old self 4 things. Does this need to be said? Does this need to be said by you or me? And does this need to be said by me right now? And if the answer to all 3 of those questions are yes, then the 4th thing I would tell my younger self, my 21-year-old self, is what's the best way to say it? Because regardless if you want to speak your mind and say how you feel, if it's meant to be, like if it needs to be said, and it needs to be said by you, and it needs to be said by you right now, there's still a way to say it. There's still a way to come across. Most people just think, I'm going to be myself. Who cares how you take it, right? And to me, like that is that's what I would tell my 21-year-old self. Like, hey, it's not always about you, right? And you could still find a way to express yourself and be respectful, and be thoughtful of other people, and the intent be about other people and not just about yourself. That's what I would do, man. Now on all these conference calls, I literally have ingrained in my head while I'm rolling my eyes. I'm thinking, does this need to be said? Does it need to be said by me? Does it need to be said by me right now? Yes. Okay. How do I say it? Right. And that's what I would tell my 21-year-old self.
Man, that's some good advice that I wish I'd had at 21. I'm sure you wish you would have had at 21. We won't get into that. That'll be for a different show when Derrick comes on about some of the stuff I've had to say, or we both have probably had to say to people we probably regret.
Yeah.
The way we said it, not necessarily that we said it. The way we said it, not necessarily that we said it, but the way we said it. That's a whole different other story. So, I'd like to say this much, man. Hey, thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thank you.
You guys go find Derrick Winston LinkedIn. You can find him on there. That's where we like to connect. And we go from there. And until the next time, sir, I'm going to have you back on because I've said before on a couple of these, we are going to have a lot of roundtable discussions about stuff, and that's why I like getting some of the people that are working in the industries and experts so that we can have these discussions and help people out there and just really just spend some time networking and spread knowledge, man.
Well, let's have a round table. Let's have our own red table, our own Jada Pinkett Smith blue
yes,
table.
we can talk about corporate entanglements.
You said that, not me, but hey, that's a great. You see how ideas flow, right? We got our blue table, corporate
You got the
table.
blue table. There it goes.
Yep, and we do it over a meal, man. When we get back to normal, we should definitely try that. Definitely.
Most definitely. All right, you guys. Well, thank you guys once again for watching. Make sure you go follow him. Make sure you follow GrindMode at GrindMode Podcast everywhere. Tell a friend, share, please, and we will talk to you guys soon.
Yeah, love.
Bye.
Peace.